So I wanted to kind of get your story. Like, where did you come from? Why did you get into guitar amps? What I mean, it's an interesting thing to get into, right?
Yeah. Well, the short version of the story would be that in the early 80s, I was working with a friend of mine overseas in England, to be exact. And we kind of cobbled together this little business where we'd trade. I would find American-made guitars, trade him for British amplifiers. And of course, it would have been Marshall, Vox, Orange, Hiwatt, all the usual suspects. But the problem was most of them were broken, or they get broken in shipping. So during the course of this, I had to teach myself how to repair them. And then because I'd had a background a little bit in electronics, my dad fixed TVs for people for like a hobby business, you know. So I had learned how to test tubes, check resistors, check capacitors, all that by the time I was about 14.
Fixing TVs is a strange notion to people today, right?
Yeah, now they don't think anything, you know, you just get a new TV, you know, but it wasn't so back then. They were an expensive appliance, if you will, and so they warranted fixing, you know. So I cut my teeth on electronics with that, and I just started applying what I knew to that. And then, of course, I could always ask my father when he was still around, what about this? I'm having this problem. And he'd always tell me to go back to college and learn something. And I go, well, don't you have any books I can just read? And then I'd get, you know, go through his library and teach myself, you know. But anyway, they would come in broken all the time. Then I started documenting the differences between certain models. Even though they were the same Vox AC30 and the same Marshall, there were subtle differences that really added up to a lot, you know. And that was part of the genesis that led to Matchless, you know, which was founded in, when did we start? 89, I guess, Rick Parada and I. And by then I'd worked down and owned probably close to 1,000 original AC30s that I had bought, fixed up, and resold, you know. Rick Parada's kitchen table, and I had a workshop in my garage, and that's where we built the first maybe 25, 30.
What was the first Matchless amp? Was it the DC30?
Well, the first one was actually just a chassis. It was used as basically a mule to try out circuits and try out different mods and things. And the next one that was built was an original DC30, and it was covered. I made that cabinet in my garage, and Rick Parada and I made the chassis. And we just pieced it together as we went, and it was a black amp with a red and blue logo. It had blue gel paper behind the logo, and I hand laid out the name with block letters and tape and a razor knife, you know, and made block letters to reverse mask it and painted it red. I don't know whatever happened to it. I'm sure it got sold somewhere along the way.
So let's settle this once and for all. Whose idea was it to light the logo up?
That was my idea. I was driving home and I kept going, you know, we're just going to be another company if we just put a plain old logo on this thing, and we got to have something that stands out to make us separated from the crowd. I thought, what about like the old Ampeg where the B15 flip tops, where the logo's backlit underneath, right, and it's light piped up to the top, and you can see the word Ampeg in the clear. And then I called Rick immediately after I got home. Hey, I got a great idea. And we thought, yeah, that's a good idea. So then we developed it over time. The original problem we were trying to solve with the Matchless company was to make an amp similar to an AC30, but that would not break down. And the biggest problem with the old JMI AC30s was they were made by technicians there that their job during World War II was to build bombs. So they didn't care how well the solder lasted as long as it lasted long enough to blow up. And I had friends by this time that were out touring, and so I was able to get some of the stuff beta tested in the field by friends, basically for free, for letting them use the amp, you know. And we just tried to make it so nothing would break. The whole goal was longevity and durability. Good sound was almost a secondary component at that point in time. And we realized quickly on, within the first few amps, that, oh, we can make this thing sound better using modern things that Vox didn't have access to at the time. The original speakers we used in the Matchless, we wanted blue Vox 15-watt speakers. Yeah. We couldn't get them. I mean, Celestion had not reissued that speaker yet, and they had no intention of it. In fact, at one point in time, there's a little bit of a funny aside. So we started using a 25 and a 30 watt in the 212 because each one has its own characteristics, and I saw it as a marketing feature. Like, hey, there's two different speakers, you can mic each one and get a separate sound in the recording environment, or live environment for that matter too. And I got some pushback within the company, and I said, let's just try it. And because the 25 was kind of close to the 15 in terms of some of the sonic characteristics, but the 30 watt carried a much better bottom end, and they didn't break either. You know, the 30 watt was a great Celestion speaker. Anyway, so we used those because we couldn't get what we wanted. And it turned out to be a big blessing in disguise.
Somebody had the idea to get one up to Art Thompson at Guitar Player magazine, right?
That's correct. Yeah, the salesman that was working with us at the time basically insisted. I mean, you got to remember, we were selling to local people, and it was a lot of work. It'd take us a couple weeks to complete one because we were doing it as a hobby business, you know. And we didn't want to take one out of production for some thing that we had no idea. We still didn't understand what he was trying to do. And he goes, I got to just leave it there for a while. And I go, well, it doesn't really help us. We can sell it, you know? But he insisted, so we went, okay, if it's that important to you, we'll put one together and take one out of production. And it was one of the early ones. I knew it was going to a magazine. I spent probably 3 days taking every tube I owned and hand-picking the best of the best of the best, because I thought, okay, everybody's going to do this. I just got to get in the door and not get slammed. And unbeknownst to us, you know, because the magazine has a cycle, it takes a while. They do their thing, and then they write about it, then it goes into release in the public, and it was months, you know. So we had cobbled together enough money to do a 10 by 10 booth at NAMM, and it took everything we had. I mean, all the money we could raise to do this 10 by 10 booth. And it wasn't much of a display, but unbeknownst to us, that we had won this shootout that they did, and we had not seen the magazine. Nobody called us. Nothing happened. Then people started coming over, showing us the magazine. We're like, what? We were shocked.
Where did the idea of de-doping the speakers come from?
I was working a lot with John Jorgensen, who ended up being Elton John's guitar player for a period of time, and he's pretty famous in the country music world. Yeah. I was on the road with the Desert Rose Band, which was one of the first bands he was in that actually came and got a hit. And it was Chris Hillman from the Byrds was the leader of the band. And so I went out on the road with them, and I saw firsthand, I'm like, oh, this keeps breaking. These keep breaking. So I got a crash course in fixing those things. I had to do it almost every show. I had to repair something, And I kept going, I got a feeling this gooey stuff on the outside is dampening the speaker and altering everything that we don't like and making the problem. So I played with it and I couldn't get it to work. So John calls me, he goes, hey, I found something that worked. He goes, oily nail polish remover. And I go, oh, you mean acetone?
Right.
And I tried it and I'm like, oh yeah, then the sound was there. It was like, okay, yeah, this is a usable sound now, Celestion found out what we're doing and they made us sign a disclaimer. They wanted to disavow everything we're doing. You're altering our product and we won't warranty it. And we're like, okay, well, can you just still sell them to us? And, we'll take the responsibility of taking care of that ourselves. So they were fine with that. Well, then after the company became successful, we got another letter from the same lawyer. And at some point we actually framed him that said, you must use our name on the speakers you're using. It had to say Celestion on it. Well, it was a byproduct of some series of events that we couldn't control. I think it was 99, but it could have been 2000. I got a call from James Heydrich, and he wants to start an amp company. And he was serious enough about it that I went, okay, I need Joe Ulrich, which was my kind of right-hand man. He and I had done a lot of things at Matchless together. He came down and we spent 3 or 4 days straight drawing up a business plan for the Bad Cat Company. And it launched from there, Initially we did the Black Cat and the Cub, and then immediately it was followed by, at the time it was called the Wildcat, which was basically the Bad Cat, the Black Cat, that with 2 EL34 power tubes instead of EL84s. Yeah, those 3 models launched it initially, yeah. It was either the end of 2003 or the end of 2004. Joe had wanted to leave. And we kind of supported each other. We had each other's back all the time. And so when Joe was going to leave, I'm like, I don't want to do this alone anymore, And so I left then when Joe left.
And you had a couple of ventures post Bad Cat.
Well, there was one venture that was running concurrently with Bad Cat, Sonic Machine Factory, which we continued that after we both left Bad Cat. Star came about because Sonic Machine Factory, we felt like it wasn't big enough to be a standalone company without some other products and other things with it. So we went into distribution of SIB pedals, which was Rick Hamill's primary business. And we had the SIB pedals, Sonic Machine Factory amps, and then I started Star Amplifiers as the handmade premium amp company during that time period.
I had heard that you were working for the Capitol Records group, right?
Yes.
Yeah, studios.
The gentleman who was president of Capitol Records was in a band with another friend of mine, that a friend of mine produced the record, and I worked on their record. It was called The Grays. But John Bryan was the musician that kind of headed it all up. He's mega talented guy, just beyond talent. And he has an 8,000 foot warehouse full of all these odd musical instruments that he plays all proficiently. But basically he brought me on to keep everything running. And it was everything from 1800s pump organs to stand-up 1940s drum trap sets, just everything. Every day was a new challenge, I mean, you never knew what you were going to face when you went to work. And one of the things was he used this record during a live performance, a recording of some sound effects. But he wanted it slightly slower, but it had to be on vinyl. It had to be, we couldn't record it over on tape, we couldn't put it in digital. So I went, okay, I got to come up with a speed controller on the record player.
Right.
And this is before everything was common. You'd have to find a circuit to slow up and slow down and speed up.
You're building parts.
I was building components, yeah, all kinds of things, everything. And whatever happened that day, you had to dig into it and fix it, you know. It was a really interesting job, but very challenging too. I really enjoyed it.
I was obsessed and fascinated with the idea of seeing what tricks you still had up your sleeves as far as tube amps. And our first project is the Era 30.
This is to be the 25th anniversary of the original one I did. And I feel like it's all the things I would have wanted from the first one I did.
Do you think it's possible to design great sounding stuff with modern tube?
Yes, yeah. Short version is yes. You have to alter the way you think and the way you approach design of a circuit, and you also end up having to alter some component values, quite a lot of them sometimes. But yes, it can be done.
What do you hope will be your legacy in this business when you're gone?
I just want to be remembered for making things that sound really good, you know? That's what I want for a legacy.